My name is Caroline Miller, and the name of my lesson is Even Steven and Odd Todd. It's for kindergarten. It starts with the essential question, what is the difference between odd and even numbers? My lesson rationale. In this lesson, students will learn the difference between odd and even numbers. This concept is important because it will help students to learn future concepts that they need to know in math. Some of those concepts include prime numbers and division. Knowing the difference between odd and even numbers can also help students to divide objects equally and help to enforce the concept of sharing. My standard is 2.1 KE, and it's to recognize even and odd number patterns. Okay. So for my anticipatory set, I would have cards that would have numbers on them, various numbers, and I would hold them up for the students and then take a vote on the board, so like a tally, to see if they think the number is odd or even. And I'll do this with about 5 numbers, give or take, depending on how much time it took. My objectives for the lesson are that students will be able to identify odd and even, the difference between odd and even numbers, and that's the applying phase of Bloom's. And then my other objective is students will be able to utilize concepts of odd and even numbers to determine which character should get which numbered plate, which is part of our activity for the whole lesson. And that's also the applying phase of Bloom's. So my procedure would start by introducing 2 characters named Odd Todd and Even Steven. And Odd Todd represents odd numbers, which you can see from the bottom of his shirt. It says odd numbers end in 1, 3, 5, 7, and 9. And then Even Steven represents even numbers, and his shirt says even numbers end in 2, 4, 6, and 8. So I would give them a little bit of a story and background on each of the characters. So it would go something like this. Even Steven loves things to be fair and equal. When he brings snacks for his friends, he must make sure that all of his friends have the same amount. He always likes to have his right hand holding the same amount as his left hand. But our little friend, Odd Todd, is completely different. He doesn't like things to be like that at all. He loves to be different and care less if his left hand holds the same amount as his right hand. In fact, he loves it when he and his friends get snack and no one gets the same amount. He doesn't care about fair. This is a great way also to teach sharing in this lesson, and how equal amounts help us to be more fair when we're dividing objects up. So for the next part of the lesson, I would ask the students to give me a number less than 20. And normally I would use Fruit Loops for this, but since Cheerios were what I had, I'm using Cheerios. So let's say the students gave me the number 13. I would count out 13 Fruit Loops, or Cheerios in this case. And then I would ask them if I should give them to Odd Todd or Even Steven. Now obviously I would give them to Odd Todd, so we're just going to go with that example. We'll say that they were right. And then I would proceed to put equal amounts of Cheerios in each of Odd Todd's hands. Now obviously that isn't going to work because 13 is an odd number and we know that, but this can help the students to better visualize why 13 is an odd number. You can't divide it evenly between his 2 hands. So yeah, we would do that a couple times. I would get a couple examples, and then after the student told me which prediction they had about which character it should go to, I would ask them why they chose that character and why they were correct or incorrect. So, after we did that a few times, we would move on to the next part of the lesson, where students would, every student would get a napkin, and they would be partnered up, and they would get a certain amount of Fruit Loops, but like I said, I'm using Cheerios, on a plate. Now, I probably would not count them. I would just take a small handful and place them on one plate and give the plate to the students for them to count. But their job would be to split up the Fruit Loops evenly between the two of them. So, whatever method they would want to use, they could use. So they would split them up. And now they could do this either by originally counting the number of Fruit Loops on their plate and then dividing them up by 2. Or they could go back and forth, 1 and 1, or 2 and 2, whatever they would want to do. This is really up to them. So now you can see that each napkin has 8. And we didn't have to try to divide up one of the Cheerios because we had an even amount. Now, if students had, instead of 16, had 15, and then had one napkin with more than the other, they would have to try to figure out how to keep the napkins equal. So they could do this by placing one of the Cheerios back on, or Fruit Loops back on the plate, and then they would have an even amount. But I would go around and ask them how they decided to split up their Fruit Loops so that I could see what strategies they used. And then once they figured out how many Fruit Loops they had, they would take a marker and write that number on their plate. And then they could, before we do this next step, they could eat their Fruit Loops. That's kind of the point of having them. It's kind of fun for them to have something that they can munch on. So then after they were done with that, they would throw their napkins away, and then I would ask them, partner the pairs to come up one by one, pair by pair, and bring their plate, and then they would have to decide if the plate should go with odd Todd or even Steven. Obviously, since this is 16, it's going to go with even Steven. And then they would be assessed based on which character to put the plate with and if it was correct or not, and their strategies for dividing up their Fruit Loops. So this is just kind of a fun lesson to not only reinforce the concepts of odd numbers and even numbers, but also to introduce the concept of sharing and what it means to give equal amounts to each person. But yeah, this is my lesson, odd Todd and even Steven.